This lesson focuses on how to improve your fluency and coherence score, which is one of the 4 categories they use to measure your speaking ability on the speaking test. So let's take a look at that. As with the other videos in this particular series, what we're looking at are the band score descriptors, in particular the fluency and coherence portion of those descriptors. And we're going to be defining a low score on this video as somewhere in the 5 to 6 range and thinking about how to boost your score up to the higher levels, okay? So we're going to be sort of translating what's on that sheet. If you click on the link there that's included for you below, that will take you to those band score descriptors. And what we're trying to do in this lesson is to translate what's there into easier terms and to give you an idea of things you can work on in order to push your score up to those higher levels that you see there. Okay, so let's get started. Improving fluency. My first point with this I want to make with you is, as with really many of the things related to speaking and writing and just language learning in general, that improvement with fluency is a lot like learning a sport or an instrument, okay? There's no concept you can understand that's going to really push your fluency ahead dramatically after you understand that concept, right? Instead of that, it's just like an instrument or sport. If I can play the guitar, I can't tell you how to play the guitar, and suddenly you're going to be able to play the guitar beautifully. You are going to have to practice the guitar or practice soccer or practice whatever that skill is in order to get better at it. Okay, only through that practice and repetition are improvements made. Fluency is just like that. As much as we can talk about it, it takes practice on your part. Practice speaking, practice trying to mimic and copy the sounds that you hear in English, trying to increase the speed at which you can speak and come up with vocabulary, things like that. All right, so we're going to talk about fluency here. Most of the things we talk about, though, are things that will require you to put in some practice and really make a strong effort to improve your fluency over time. Okay, so keep that in mind as we're talking about these things. All right, now first of all, the first thing that they're looking for on IELTS in the speaking section when they're trying to measure your fluency, your ability to speak fluently. All right, so what is that? First one, is your rate of speech similar to a native speaker without frequent self-correction and repetition? All right, so self-correction is when you notice a mistake in what you said and you have to go backwards and correct that mistake. Okay, so if that can be a good thing sometimes, but if you do that too much, it's a problem. Repetition is exactly what it says, when you repeat the same words or ideas over and over. So a low-scoring student, okay, here are the features there. Somebody who's scoring in the sort of 5 to 6 range. They're going to use a slow speed, okay, and a slow speed to process grammar and vocabulary as that person speaks, okay? So they have to really think. They're struggling to think about what's going to be correct grammatically and what words they can use to express their idea. Okay, so those are the qualities there. So I see that you see them listed below. Unable to find the right words fast enough, or insufficient vocabulary to discuss a topic. Unable to process familiar grammar while speaking. All right, so these are the qualities of a lower scoring student. They're slowed down, they're struggling with grammar and vocabulary as they talk. A higher scoring student will not have problems with these things. They will be able to speak at what we could define as a normal rate of speed. All right, now, of course, there's a range of what normal is. Some people naturally speak very fast. Other people naturally speak very slow. What we're looking for and what the IELTS interviewer is looking for is irregular or abnormally slow or sort of halted speech while you're speaking. Okay, that's where the problems come into play. And so a high-scoring speaker will easily find appropriate vocabulary in every topic and easily manipulate grammar and express ideas while speaking. So that's your goal. So how do you get there? Well, as I mentioned at the top of the video, you have to be using your English. You cannot just, you can't be sort of thinking about English, maybe reading in English, and then expect to be fluent speaking in English. You have to be speaking regularly in order to gain any kind of fluency or to keep the fluency you once had. Okay, sometimes people were fluent a few years ago, but then they haven't used their English in a while, and then you lose it. Okay, so anyway, you have to practice, but there's things you can do. So as you're practicing IELTS speaking questions in particular, you're recording your answers. Analyze them a little bit. Okay, let's look at an example of maybe an intermediate student or a sort of lower level student even, and some way that they might process their own speaking. Okay, so here's an example down below of a person responding to this prompt that you see above. All right, so tell me about a time from your childhood when you were successful at something. So a lower level student will maybe possibly even be somewhat fluent, okay, but they're going to have lots and lots of systematic grammar errors, let's say, okay? So they're just using, they're using the correct verb, but they're not doing what they need to do in order to make these verbs, in this case, into past tense, okay? So you can see if you read down below there, all the things in red are grammar errors. One time I win a cooking contest at my school. All the judges are supposed to cook their favorite food, and judges, who was our teachers, provide a grade. I make a special kind of cookie and win. Okay, let's imagine this student could say all of this somewhat fluently. Their score would not be very good, not with fluency, but with grammar here. Okay, so this student's learning English. They recognize, wait a minute, I'm making all these errors, and I recognize that. And suddenly that same student is able to catch themselves by correcting those errors, but usually that comes at a price, and that price is their fluency. Their fluency decreases. So here's the same answer, but with someone who is able to recognize their grammar problems, but it impacts their fluency negatively, right? One time I won a cooking contest at my school. All the children were supposed to cook their favorite food, and judges, who were our teachers, provide a grade. I made a special kind of cookie and won. Okay, here, just to show you what typically happens when students are halting or stopping, pausing, and self-correcting. This is where fluency score decreases, when you're making these pauses and corrections as you're talking, because you have to think about the grammar or the vocabulary you're trying to use. This is what you should be looking for in your own responses. You want to find these things and try to fix them. Now, how can you do that? Well, the best way to do that is to respond to practice questions and the same practice questions repeatedly. Okay, don't just answer a particular practice question from Magoosh or wherever else you're getting practice questions and then never look at that question again. You want to record yourself, analyze what you say, and then try to say the same thing again, the same answer again in the future. Maybe a week later, you come back to the same question and try to do better this time. The repeated practice, the repetition, just like a soccer player or a musician learning an instrument, those repetitions end up being the thing that increase fluency. Okay, so that's why that repeated practice can be a big benefit to your fluency score. So again, don't just put a question away forever after you've answered it once. Answer questions multiple times and listen to yourself, record yourself, and analyze those responses, trying to improve your response the next time you answer. Okay, another issue here with this particular category of scoring. So first we looked at fluency. Now the second part of the scoring category is coherence. Now, coherence is how well your ideas stick together, how well they make sense together, or whether you have logical gaps in your speaking. A low-scoring student has logical connections between ideas, but they tend to be somewhat unclear, especially in lengthy responses, right? Your part 2 and part 3 responses, you have some gaps in the logic, or there seem to be missing parts to your responses, or the ideas don't seem to connect logically to one another in the way that you might that would make them extremely clear. Okay, so part of this is using connectives. So down at the bottom of the box there, overuses a small number of connectives. Connectives is a large category of things. It can be things like transition words and phrases that you're learning. It can also be things like pronouns. Okay, we're going to look at that in just a second. Okay, a high-scoring student fully develops ideas. Okay, the relationships between ideas are very clear, and there's no question about whether there's a gap in sort of logic, or whether one idea seems to flow naturally from one to the next. With an advanced score, will be very clear that all ideas seem to fit logically and flow easily from one to the next. Advanced speakers have a strong command of these connectives that we're going to talk about in just a second. Okay, so question number 1, do you use connectives well? All right, so let's take a look. One part of connectives, as mentioned, are transition words, and I have a link down below for you to look at transition words that can help you. All right, so that's probably something you're aware of, is transition word and phrase use. Let's look at something that might be new to you, which is the idea of reference. Okay, reference are a kind of connective that might be helpful for you to think about as you analyze your speaking responses and try to boost your score. So a referent is basically some way in which you refer back to something that was previously said. The idea here is something you're familiar with, like a pronoun. You use a pronoun like he, she, or it to describe a person that you mentioned before, right? And it refers back to that person. Pronouns are one type of referent, but there are others as well. Here's what I'd like you to do. Let's pause the video now and just read through this example describing somebody's friend named John who found a new job, okay? The parts in red are parts to focus on because these are places where there could be improvements in use of reference, okay? So pause the video now. Go ahead and read through this paragraph. Okay, so hopefully you noticed how often there's repetition here, okay? It's not as coherent as it could be because this person repeats him or herself so frequently. The name John is repeated, friend, company, okay, what he studied in college, marketing, okay, all these words could really benefit from some use of reference to pull the ideas together and make them really coherent and smooth sounding, right? So let's look at an improved paragraph here. Look at the ways that the ideas are not repeated over and over. We're using connections with pronouns and other words in order to avoid this type of repetition, and therefore the ideas flow smoothly. Now pause your video and read through this one, and then we'll just point out some of the nice features after you do. Okay, so go ahead and pause your video and read this paragraph. Okay, so notice how in the second sentence there, we've avoided saying John. Okay, again, we're talking about his dream this time, using a pronoun there. Instead of saying the company again, the technology company, we use this firm, okay? He will join the marketing department, which is what he studied in college. And of all we're looking at here is creating smooth connections between sentences by avoiding this kind of repetition that is really something that's typical of a lower level English student. Let's look at a final category here, which is, can you speak at length without fluency problems? Okay, so in this case, we're thinking about part 2 and part 3 responses, these longer responses, okay? And a lower scoring student really struggles with these. Maybe the part 1 responses you can give, 1 to 2 sentence answers easily, but somebody who struggles with their fluency score is going to have more and more trouble with those longer responses. Whereas a higher scoring student easily does this. They can talk at length about whatever the question is and not have a lot of pauses, not have a lot of repetition, these problems that they're looking for in your fluency. Okay, so what can you do about this issue? All right, well, there's a very good thing you can practice in order to improve your ability to speak at length about a topic. And that thing is to master the organization of a lengthy response. This is something you can practice. Even when you have an intermediate level of vocabulary, you can still master this thing, and it might make longer responses easier and clearer, therefore boosting your coherence score. All right, so here's the model. You want to start always in a response with a main point. The main idea you want to express can be one sentence. Then you want to add a detail about that thing, an example, a specific idea that you want to mention. And then you repeat. If you have a second main point, bring that up after your detail. You go from general to specific to general to specific, and this method of answering longer response questions can make your answers clearer. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Let's look at an example. Let's say you get the question like this: what do you like about summer? Okay, now it requires a longer response. It's kind of a simple question, I know, but it'll help us to show you how to respond to a question like this using this particular format. Okay, let's imagine we're responding in this way. I love outdoor activities. There's your main point. So that's why you love summer. That's point number 1, that you love outdoor activities. Now, many students at this point start listing other reasons why they love summer. Okay, so I love outdoor activities, and they might move next to, I also love, to travel, and summer's a time to travel. I also love to swim in the ocean. Okay, so starting to list activities over and over, and then they quickly run out of things to say. In this model, what we do is we slow down. You say your main point, I love outdoor activities, and then you move to details. Give examples. Talk about what kinds of outdoor activities you love to do in the summer. Instead of moving on to all of your points right at the beginning and running out of things to say, now you try to go in depth into one idea. So this example, after saying I love outdoor activities, it moves to where I live. Summer is a time when people go outside for recreation. I especially like spending time at the beach and camping. I usually arrange at least one camping and hiking trip with several of my friends each summer. I really look forward to it. All of these details are about outdoor activities. We've only described one main point, but look how much we had to say about it. In my experience, this is one thing that my students really could improve on easily and do a much better job of extending their answers and having much more coherent and fluent responses because they use this structure. Then, after the details, after I really look forward to it, if you have more to say, you can add a second point. Another reason summer is so great is whatever, and then you can provide some details about that. Even if you can only think of one example to say, That's good. That's better than simply going and listing all of your reasons right at the beginning and running out of things to say. So master this structure. For part 3 responses, you should be saying your main points, but including as much detail as possible in order to extend your responses and hopefully get a higher fluency and coherence score. Okay. So, some additional ideas to finish here on what you can do. Study vocabulary every day. Vocabulary is a big part of fluency and a big part of your ability to be coherent. So don't forget to study vocabulary. 10 to 15 new words every day is great. Activate your vocabulary. Use it or lose it, right? Even those people, some of you out there probably studied English in high school and then maybe you have a few years where you didn't use it. You need to use your language in order to be fluent in any language you're learning, okay? So from now until test day, you should be trying to use your English as much as possible on a daily basis. Record yourself and analyze your speech. All of the tips that I've provided in this lesson require you to analyze your responses. So make sure you're recording every response and returning to it, listening to the problems you have with fluency, listening to ways you could make your speech more coherent. Answer the same questions multiple times. As suggested earlier in the lesson, you don't put a question away forever after you've responded to it once. Okay, so that's our lesson on improving fluency and coherence, boosting your score for this particular category in the speaking section.